Hello, everybody. As we get closer to the election, the issue of lying, political lying, is becoming one of the central issues of the election. Our guest today on the show is an authority on lying. I guess he's a truth teller. I hope he is, at least. Bill Adair is a professor at Duke University. He's the Knight Professor of the Practice of Journalism and Public Policy. That's KNIGHT. Um, he is also the founder of PolitiFact. He left that in 2020 to focus on his new book, which has just come out, Beyond the Big Lie, The Epidemic of Political Lying, Why Republicans Do It More, and How It Could Burn Down Our Democracy. And Bill is joining us from Durham, where Duke University is based. Bill, why is the issue of lying, of political dishonesty, why has it always been such an important issue in your life? I know you have a background before you got your teaching job at Duke. You used to be a reporter.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think that it's important because lying prevents us from having an honest political discussion. We cannot have a discussion about the issues. We can't have a serious conversation about policy if we don't agree on the facts. And so if you have the parties disagreeing about the sort of basic building blocks of policy, about the problem that they're trying to discuss, it's pretty difficult to have a serious conversation. And of course, that's the situation we're in on some of the biggest topics of our time: immigration, climate, and more recently, even disasters. So you have a hurricane hit Western North Carolina, and it becomes completely politicized, which is not that unusual, but the Republicans immediately start lying about what FEMA is doing and trying to link it to immigration, and it's it's preposterous, and so that makes it really hard for the disaster workers to do their jobs. This is a problem that lying in politics has always been around, but it's gotten worse because of the fact that we're all connected now through the internet and various social media, and it's harder and harder for fact checkers like PolitiFact to keep up with the lies.
Bill, I remember, I shouldn't probably admit this in public, but when I was growing up, I once told a lie to my mother, and I've never seen her angrier. She was really furious. I'd done lots of things wrong, but lying seemed to have crossed the line with her. Doesn't mean I haven't told lies since. But I wonder, did you have an experience growing up with lying? Was it, or should it be something that parents particularly clamp down on their children with?
My mother had very simple advice about lying. I remember her saying not only that lying was wrong, but just that it was a lot easier to tell the truth because you didn't have to keep track of who you had told what to, and try to remember, oh wait, did I tell that person something different? And she was just like, it's just easier to tell the truth. So she had a very practical approach.
Well, she clearly hadn't done anything wrong, or she wasn't running for office, or perhaps she isn't a member or wasn't a member of the Republican Party. It's easy to tell the truth if you're pure, if you've never done anything wrong, if your version of reality doesn't actually conform with reality itself, isn't it?
I think it's important to understand sort of the different types of lying, and I go into that in some detail in Beyond the Big Lie, that I create a taxonomy of lying so that we understand that there's a difference between a misdemeanor lie and a felony lie, that there are different types of lies, and I try to help people understand that there's self-defense lies when somebody gets in trouble and they just completely deny everything that happened. Their policy lies when they lie about something, a topic like climate. And so I try to distinguish that so that people.
How do you do that? I mean, the book is called Beyond the Big Lie, so presumably there are small lies. What's the difference between a big lie and a small lie?
Well, a small lie might be something that's a numbers lie, where somebody is referring to unemployment statistics and exaggerates them. In a way that almost you wouldn't necessarily call a lie. But a more serious lie might be saying that people in Western North Carolina are being denied disaster benefits because of,
or they're eating their pets.
Yeah, or
not eating other. They're not eating their own pets. They're eating other people's pets.
And we have to realize that, as I noted a little bit earlier, lying isn't new, but lying's gotten worse. And of course, we're focused this year on Donald Trump. The book is not exclusively about Donald Trump. He's mentioned in here. I definitely.
His tie's on the cover. I'm guessing it's his tie.
Yeah, we're not being particularly subtle with the tie. There's and there's no question that Donald Trump is a big factor in the lying and why it's so bad now. But I trace it back before Donald Trump. If you ask people in politics, political operatives, politicians, sort of, when did the problem get really bad for the Republican Party? They actually trace it back to Newt Gingrich, and when he took control of the House in the early 1990s.
Yeah, Bill, many people have come on the show and traced it back. If they don't trace it back to Gingrich, they'll trace it back to Reagan. And if they don't trace it back to Reagan, they'll trace it back to Nixon. You seem to think that Republicans, quote unquote, do it more. But I'm guessing if a Republican saw this title or subtitle, they might say, well, what about, I don't know, Bill Clinton, for example, who was a brilliant liar? I mean, isn't being a great politician, being able to lie? Reagan lied in a way, Clinton lies in a way. Clearly, Trump lies endlessly. In fact, he rarely tells the truth. It's news when he does tell the truth. But isn't that what a good politician is, or at least a successful politician is, being not only a good liar, but a big liar?
Well, absolutely. And so I should point out, this book is not just about Republicans. I focus on plenty of Democrats, both over time and also in the modern day. And you make the point that lying is a key trait of politicians. I make that point. I have a quote in here that I love from Bob Bauer, who is former White House counsel to President Obama, now is his personal attorney and is a personal attorney to President Biden. And Bob Bauer makes the point that lying is just a key part. It's basically a lubricant of American politics. And so, so I definitely acknowledge that in the book. Bob says you can't separate lying from politics. And I don't approach this as some purist, who's like, oh my God, they're lying. But what I'm trying to look at in the book is the fact that this has become an epidemic.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring that up because, of course, again, that's not a throwaway word in the subtitle. The epidemic of political lying. When we think of epidemics, of course, we think of COVID. What do you mean by an epidemic? Is it out of control like COVID was in the summer of 2020?
Well, I think it is in this regard. Lying is keeping us from having serious conversations about these important issues. Lying affects our health because of denial of facts on things like COVID. I mean, if you think about how many unnecessary deaths there were in COVID because of the lies that were spread about vaccines, and about other measures to for the public health. So I do think lying is an epidemic, and I think the book makes a strong case for that.
An
So
epidemic in the sense that it, like COVID, anyone can get it. It's not just a few people. Is it? Is it
well, I think it's
quote
an
unquote
epidemic.
as an epidemic? Is it something you can catch if you sit next to the wrong person on an aeroplane?
Um, that's a great question. I guess if you fall for their lies, yes, but I don't think it's quite that. I don't think it's quite that contagious. I think you have to be. I think you have to fall for the lies. And so what I do in the book is I take the I examine case studies, which are really just interesting stories of people who have been victims of lies. I follow Nina Jankowicz, who was the head of the Disinformation Governance Board, herself an expert in disinformation, a government official hired by the Biden administration to oversee this internal group in the Department of Homeland Security to better do internal coordination of the department's response to disinformation. When this group gets announced in a very clumsy manner by the Biden administration and is given one of the worst names ever for a government agency, it's given this Orwellian name that immediately invokes the Ministry of Truth. Nina becomes the subject of lies from conservative media, from Republican politicians, in such volume that she gets death threats, constant doxing, threats of violence, to the point where she has to get protection. She fears for her life. And this is all because of lies from.
So she's the head of a government agency focused on what, eliminating lying, addressing lying.
No, she's the head of a government agency that actually wasn't even a government agency. It was an internal working group in the Department of Homeland Security, and its mission was to coordinate the various agencies within the department that all in one way or another were affected by disinformation. But she and this group became the subject of lying in such volume. People dug up recordings that she had made in high school, YouTube videos and things, and then Fox News played them constantly. And as a result, her life was turned upside down because she couldn't even, because the Department of Homeland Security did nothing to respond to this. They wouldn't let her respond to it. And so all these lies were spread about this agency and about Nina, to the point where it was just a real tragedy how somebody's life can be ruined by political lies. And
so it's a kind of pogrom, but isn't the issue here not the actual lying, but the way in which the violence, the anger, the sense of revenge takes over? So the issue here is perhaps the political culture rather than what you call the big lie.
Well, I think the culture is part of it, and
And
some
I'm
of
not
it,
excusing the lie. I mean, I'm not
yeah.
suggesting
I
that
mean,
that's
I mean, it's a culture that seems to accept this behavior, but this is a woman whose life was ruined because the Fox News channel and a bunch of people in Congress decided to lie about her and the agency. And that led people to make death threats. Do you think that's the kind of culture we want to have?
No, and I'm not defending the culture in any means, but anyone who issues a death threat because they think someone lied seems to me a little detached from reality. So let's get to the core of the book, Bill. You say that Republicans do it more. I accept your point that Democrats also lie. Do you think, and I think a lot of us are scratching our heads over this one, is the reason why it seems at least Republicans lie more is because reality is unacceptable to them?
Or is it that Stephen Colbert was right that the truth has a liberal bias?
No, I mean, in all seriousness, that the world itself does not, for better or worse, conform to how the Republicans view it, perhaps culturally, economically, politically. So they're almost forced to lie in order to appear in any way credible.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. The answers I got were sort of less lofty and more practical. That some said that Republicans lie more. Well, this is sort of along the lines of what you're saying, that their base is shrinking, an older white
Right.
base of voters. And so to retain that base, they have to lie about the key issues that appeal to that base. So that would fit into your idea. Some of the other reasons have to do with a media ecosystem that not only allows the lying in a frictionless way, conservative media not pushing back on the lies, but profits from the lies, as we saw with the Dominion case, where Fox realized that for it to stop the bleeding, so to speak, when it started to lose viewers after the 2020 election, it needed to ramp up the lying about the election because the viewers had been flocking to other conservative networks.
Well, there in the end, they got burnt by that. Giuliani is the same. The news today is that I think he has to hand over all his valuable assets to two election workers in Georgia. So ultimately, the lies can't, they don't always, but they can catch up, can't they, Bill?
Absolutely. And that's what's been interesting is that the big lie in my title is, of course, the election lie. And if you look at what happened for the conservative outlets, for Newsmax and Fox, they have had to go to settlements in these big lawsuits for Dominion or Smartmatic, the other voting system. So lying did have consequences in this case. Now, has that stopped them? No, but I think they've been more selective in what they've lied about. And so, on an issue like immigration, they can lie without harming a company or a person. And so I think that's where we are today. But the election really showed that lies do have consequences.
I hope so. I was talking to a friend yesterday about immigration and how it's so hard to understand. It's such a complicated issue, and neither side really addresses it. What about I mean, we all know about Trump as a liar. It's not really even news these days. The title of your book and the cover reveals Trump's red tie on fire. But how would you respond, for example, to a Republican who might say to you, well, yeah, Trump's a liar, no one's going to deny that. But when Harris doesn't answer anyone's question, she barely does any interviews. And when anyone ever asks her anything, you leave the conversation with your head spinning because you have no idea what she's saying. In her own way, she's lying. Is that an argument, Bill, or is that just an excuse for Republicans to lie more and more?
As a journalist, I'd like to see her do more interviews. I'd like to see her be more specific. But I wouldn't equate that with lying. I've had plenty of politicians that I've interviewed over the years, and I've been frustrated when they don't answer my questions. I remember interviewing Dick Cheney in 2000, and it was like a sit down face-to-face interview in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
This was when you were with the Tampa Bay Times?
Yeah. And I remember thinking, I might as well have just read the talking points because he just rattled off the party talking points. So, interviews are pretty often limited in what you're going to get out of them. But I don't, I do believe she has been evasive in her answers to many of the questions that she's gotten.
We seem to live in odd times. We're obsessed with lying, probably rightly. Your book focuses on that. And yet we're obsessed with finding out certain kind of truths. We're in the period just before the election. We're all obsessed with polls. The Hill today reports that Harris leads Trump by 4 points. No one's quite sure. The Hill also reports on millions of dollars going to politics betting sites. Is there something slightly surreal, Bill, about American politics, where on the one hand, the politicians, particularly in one party, they lie all the time. On the other hand, the electorate and the media is obsessed with certain kinds of quantifiable truths, which are very hard to quantify because they kind of move around a lot. So we're desperate for quantification, and all we get are lies.
Well, you know what I've been pleased at this time? I'm glad you brought this up, that the polls have been so close that it's actually like I kind of stopped following them. And I've heard this from other friends in journalism, that it's just so close. It's like, up a point, down a point, too close to call, everything within the margin of error. Who knows? So I think that's good, because that has kept us from getting obsessed with the horse race, and allowed us to focus more on what they're saying. So then, so every day, instead of looking at the latest tracking polls, I want to see, like, I was at lunch, I was like, what have they said on the campaign trail today? That's a healthy thing.
Although there are lots of rumors, and maybe Republican voters in particular are learning from the master liar that they lie to pollsters, and that's why the pollsters got it wrong last time. Do you think the electorate have a moral responsibility to tell the truth to pollsters?
No, people ask, like, should lying be illegal? Like, no, I don't think lying should be illegal, and no, I don't think people have a moral obligation to tell the truth to pollsters. And I also think they have.
So why do you think? And again, this is anecdotal. I'm probably wrong. I'm certainly not a pollster. Is that Republicans mislead pollsters more than Democrats? It always seems as if the pollsters underestimate Republican voters because the Republicans don't tell them who they're going to vote for, or they mislead them.
Well, I would say that fits with the whole disdain for media, and I think polling is seen as sort of an extension of that. And so, we're going to stick it to this big media polling conglomerate, and we're going to not tell them that
the Ezra Kleins of the world and the other pollsters.
So I think they're perfectly willing to. Now the pollsters claim this time that they've accounted for that undercounting from
Yeah,
before.
sorry, not the Ezra Kleins, the Nate Silvers of the world, who is also himself a controversial figure. Because people get angry when the pollsters come out with polls that they don't like, as if these people are biased somehow.
Yeah. But I think, and I've never been a journalist. One of the things in political journalism that we go through every fall of an election year is you'll have this conversation with your editor, and the editor's like, "We need an issue story. Go write stories about these issues," and the reporter goes and writes a story about whatever, immigration and the candidates, or economic policy or whatever, and then like hardly anybody reads those stories, and so we don't.
Yeah, it seems the electorate more interested in the size of Arnold Palmer's manhood, perhaps, than in policy on immigration. In all seriousness, though, Bill, you talked about a kind of culture war. Is this in itself a culture war? You've become very popular on the talk show circuit. You've been on the Jon Stewart show. Your book comes with blurbs from people like Al Franken and Margaret Sullivan. The book's doing very well. Lots of tours. Top journalists are doing sessions with you. Is this a form of the culture war between top-down truth tellers, or the owners of truth, guys like Jon Stewart and Al Franken, and the little people in America who are not allowed to lie? They're the children, you're the grown-ups or the parents?
I don't know. I think you're reading an awful lot into what's really just a book about lying in politics. What I said.
But my point is not the book, but you've been acclaimed, embraced by the cultural elite. Maybe it's not your fault, but they seem to like your message. Or maybe it's just because you're telling the truth.
Well, I think what I have done is take a subject that everybody talked about, but no one had really looked into. So if you think about it, like, everybody talks about lying in politics, like, oh my God, they're lying, Donald Trump's lying and whatever. But no one, I discovered, had really written a book where the author had asked politicians, why do you lie?
And do they admit it? I mean,
it's like the most simple thing. Like, let's just look into why politicians lie, how they lie, the patterns of lying. So that's what I did.
But did they acknowledge it? I mean, do you have politicians who will willingly go on record and say, yeah, I lie all the time?
Not many.
But women?
There were very few, and it was mostly the political operatives that would do that. One was Tim Miller, also an author, who had, of course, a former Republican who had written a great book about explaining why the Republican Party went gaga for Trump. And he described lying in 2012 for the Romney campaign in a really funny scene. I have a chapter that follows a lie in as the Romney campaign decided to put up an ad that was just based on a fundamentally just a big lie. And the Romney campaign was like, we're going to do this. Romney's going to say it. We're going to put it on the air. And there was a conscientious objector on the staff who was like, this is a bad idea. We shouldn't do it. They didn't care. They went ahead. They put the ad up anyway. And so the chapter goes into the machinations of this, the fight behind the scenes. And so what's different about this book is that it just asks these simple questions and tells stories about how politicians lie, and also how they chose not to. So there's a chapter where I profile a senator from Arizona, state senator from Arizona, who makes a decision not to go along with the big lie about the election. So I think one of the reasons the book has become popular is that it's accessible. This is not um, a big, thick academic book. It's a book about a few people that zeroes in on a few people who have been victims of lies, like Nina, who have fallen for lies.
You mentioned, Bill, you mentioned Dick Cheney. Of course, his daughter, Liz Cheney, seems uncomfortable with lying. She has come out very publicly in her accusations against Trump, particularly on the big lie and January 6th. Do you think one of the reasons why Cheney seems less willing to lie than many other Republicans is because she's female?
I don't. I didn't come across anything to indicate any pattern involving.
You said they're all men. I mean, I got the sense that you were suggesting that perhaps women lie less than men, or is that wrong?
I didn't see anything to indicate anything about gender.
So what is it about Trump? Not Trump. Cheney. Is she just more virtuous, braver, more honest, more stubborn?
She was one politician. I was disappointed that she would not do a sit-down interview with me. So I can't really speak in great detail about her because
I'm surprised because I would have thought
she would have interviewed. Yeah, I was disappointed also.
You should have told her that you sat down with her father and he got nothing out of him, so you get more out of her.
Right.
Well, okay, so we know lying's bad. We don't need a book to tell us that. You believe that we can make it, quote, unpopular. You had an interesting piece in Time this week. How to make lying unpopular in politics. How do we do that? What do we do about lying in politics? No one really likes it, I don't think.
So the end of the book is a chapter that, like many books that try to tackle an issue, it's a chapter about solutions. And
I know as I write these kind of books, I always hate my solutions chapter. They always age really badly.
Exactly.
Did you want a solutions chapter, or was it their idea, the publisher? Oh, Bill, we've lost your sound.
I'm sorry. I'm proud
of the publisher. Say that. So respond to the question. Did you want a solutions chapter?
I'm proud of my solutions chapter because I've gotten a lot of good feedback about it, because the solutions are, I think, they manage to be both gutsy and conceivable, I guess, plausible. But the one that you just highlighted is goes like this. So that was an op-ed I wrote for Time magazine that grew out of an idea that I mentioned in the solutions chapter, and the idea is this: in Washington, there is a group called Americans for Tax Reform, run by
Grover Norquist. Who's
and Grover Norquist is a kind of legendary power broker in Washington who has managed to get most Republicans who run for the House or Senate to sign this pledge that they will oppose tax increases. Very successful. So imagine if we had the same thing for lying. What if you got politicians to agree to sign a pledge that they would not lie? And now there wouldn't have to be any enforcement mechanism. That could all be part of the media coverage of a campaign. That could be part of the candidates debating. But the candidates would hold each other accountable. The media would hold the candidates accountable. But you could, as a baseball cap that one of my students saw at a Democratic rally the other day says, make lying unpopular again, or make lying wrong again, I think the cap said. So what this would do is sort of turn the tables on lying, so that there was peer pressure on politicians not to do it anymore. And I really think if we could get it going, that it's the kind of thing that could have an impact.
You also wrote an interesting piece in The Atlantic entitled What I Didn't Understand About Political Lying, in which you talk about platforms, tech and media companies needing to create incentives for truth-telling and deterrence for lying. Platforms should charge higher ad rates to candidates who have the worst records amongst fact checkers. I mean, that, especially given the Republican contempt for the platforms, the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, isn't that only going to compound the lack of trust in these platforms? And who's going to determine that? Is it going to be a government agency dealing with it?
No, I think Facebook, for example, and Instagram rely on third-party fact checkers. They use fact-checking organizations like factcheck.org and PolitiFact, and to give them determinations of what's true and false, so that Facebook and Instagram can make decisions about moderating content. And moderating content is a perfectly reasonable thing that the social media companies do, that most people want them to do, like to take down things that are not accurate. So the idea of this is simply not, in the case of politicians, which Facebook doesn't limit in any way, unlike other people. Politicians are free to say anything they want on Facebook. But for their ads, Facebook would simply charge more for a politician who had a worse record with fact checkers, and charge less to a politician who had a good record. And I think that could, and this is an idea from one of my students, this is an idea that could really have an impact. That because what do politicians care about? Advertising to reach their constituents. And so if you hit them, at something like this that they really care about, I think it could affect their behavior. I think it's a really plausible idea.
I think it would be profoundly unpopular, actually, with the platform.
You know what? But
because I think that it would seem as if the platforms are somehow profiting from lying somehow, or that it's in their interest to charge them more. So I'm not sure it necessarily is a great gift to the platforms, but
I think the platforms could make it a wash if that's the concern, because they could reduce the rates for the candidates with the better records by the same amount that they're raising the rates for the candidates who lie the most.
It would be enormously controversial. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah,
Finally, Bill.
Again, I'm trying to be bold here, because clearly the status quo is not stopping these guys from lying. And I should be clear about political fact checking. As the founder of PolitiFact, I had modest expectations about the impact of fact checking and PolitiFact. It's not like I thought that politicians would stop lying. I once got in an argument with David Carr from the New York Times about this, and he's like, well, fact checking is a failure. Politicians are still lying, which is a ridiculous expectation. I mean, no one in their right mind would expect that politicians would stop lying because of fact checking. In the same way that it's not like investigative reporting has ended political corruption, So fact checking is intended to give people information about what politicians are saying and whether it's accurate or not.
I wonder, though, Bill, whether there is a danger. I mean, I take your point, and these ideas are interesting. Whether if some of these things are instituted, it would do away with, I mean, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing to do away with Trump, but politicians who skirt lying, like, say, Reagan, for example, who was a master storyteller. His version of reality sometimes didn't conform with other people's. But ultimately, we're just going to get bots. We're just going to get AI algorithms that are provable and checkable, and politics will be drained of all energy and color and interest and passion.
Well, at that point, we'll all be governed by our robot overlords, so I don't think we'll care.
Or our platform models. Finally, Bill, doesn't lying usually eventually come out in the wash? I remember the story of Liz Cheney. Sorry, not Liz Cheney. Liz Truss. That was a Freudian error. Liz Truss, the former prime minister in England, the Great Britain. She didn't last very long because she sold such big lies about the economy, and she got pushback from the market. And she basically single-handedly wrecked the British economy. It wasn't a hard thing to wreck. Trump might do the same thing. He tells lies about the economy continually. But according to CNN, at least, if his proposals actually go through, it's going to result in trashing Social Security. So don't lies eventually come out? So, for example, if Trump is elected in November, all the lies about the economy and foreign policy and all the rest of it, they're all eventually going to come out.
Well, the lies are out. I mean, we know he's lying about hundreds of things. The issue is whether people care about those lies. And right now, a lot of people don't. And, that's up to the people to decide whether they care. The New York Times had a story last week. A lot of people, they know he's lying. It's not that big a deal to them. So if he gets elected, they'll get what they paid for. And I think the issue is bigger. It's bigger than Trump. It comes back, and not to sound moralistic, but we just have to decide, like, how much of this do we want to accept? I wrote this book with the idea to help people understand it, and I wrote a book that is a series of stories about people who engage in this process or are affected by lies in one way or another. And I think it paints a compelling story that lying is a serious problem of our age, and it's something we need to think about.
But coming back to the market, isn't the market a more effective determiner or revealer of truth and lying than government agencies or internet platforms?
No, I think we're talking about two different things. The market determines whether people care about lies, but I think it doesn't take the market to determine if somebody's lying. I think people can assess the accuracy of what someone says without having to rely on a large market.
Well, finally, Bill, I got to ask you, who's going to win?
I'm no good at predictions.
Well, that's why I asked.
Yeah,
Nobody is.
Not.
You don't want to. You don't want to.
I'm not going to venture into that.
I'm not going to venture anything.
I'm no good.
But I assume you want, given your critique of Trump and your view that he is such a consummate liar, I assume you'd be happier if Harris wins the election.
I want people to be educated about lying and make the best choices.
Well, Bill Adair, author of Beyond the Big Lie. We need to get beyond that big lie. I'm not sure if we ever will, but you're trying to get us beyond it with all your stories about politicians from the front lines. Thank you so much, Bill. Congratulations on the book. It's doing extremely well. I'm going to have to get you back on the show after the election to determine the fate of the big lie after November 2024. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for having me.